For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Betend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we feature leaders of the cannabis industry. We talk to everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. Okay, imagine this. You're pouring a hazy amber in a glass. It has a mild but pleasant hoppy aroma, crisp bubbles that make a fine, effervescent texture with flavors of citrus, flowers, and a hint of bitterness. And despite what you might think, I am not describing a beer. Well, not an alcoholic one, at least. That's actually the description for High Style Brewery's CBD-infused Pale Haze Amber. While the cannabis industry is still dealing with the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, one particular niche area of that industry got hit a lot harder than others. That's THC and CBD-infused beer manufacturers. And while it's niche now, it very likely won't be for long. In fact, before the pandemic, store shelves were on the verge of being lined with CBD beer offerings from well-known distributors. Lyden Henderson is the co-founder of High Style Brewing, which makes the beer that I described earlier. I called Lyden up to find out what exactly CBD-infused beer is, why it's such an exciting alternative to traditional non-alcoholic beers, and how the COVID pandemic has impacted this currently small but potentially massive market. Lyden, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jesse. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Can you break down for me what exactly are these drinks?
Yeah, it's a great question. So these are they're brewed products. They're brewed just like a traditional beer would be brewed. We just spent a considerable amount of time and effort at the beginning of our process figuring out how to adjust our beer recipe so that whenever we take the alcohols out at the end, we're still left with a product that tastes good. Whenever we first started talking about infusing cannabis into beers, our first hurdle was obviously that alcohol is a federally regulated substance, and THC cannabis is federally illegal, and so we needed to find a way to make it non-alcoholic, or we knew we needed a non-alcoholic product in order to infuse it with cannabis. Now, I'm not sure how many non-alcoholic beers you've tried in your life, Jesse. I've had, before I got into the industry, I drank maybe 3 or 4, and not a single one did I want to finish a 12-ounce bottle of, let alone go back and make a review. They're just terrible. And so that was our first hurdle. Was we contracted with several brewers here in San Diego. I mean, we were fortunate to be in a mecca of craft brew. And so we put feelers out and we contracted with several brewers to try and make us a pale ale recipe that would have alcohol removed and could come in at under 0.5% alcohol by volume, which is the legal limit for an alcoholic beverage. And so we went through several iterations of that. And after about 18 months of R&D, we actually had a product that tasted really good. I enjoyed going back and having multiple bottles of it, regardless of whether or not we'd infuse it with THC or CBD. It was a good tasting beverage. So I guess that's the base beverage that we use is a beer that we've removed the alcohol from at the end of the process. Now, our next hurdle that we had to get into was cannabis is an oil-soluble product and beer is a water-based product. And so what would happen is you'd get a ring of oils around the top, and everybody, the very first drink that you took out of the bottle, you'd get the entire full dosage of the THC, and you wouldn't really be able to measure it out throughout the bottle. Drink half a bottle and see how you feel, because all the THC would be contained in the beginning. Plus, the onset time of traditional edibles that has to get processed through your liver is 90 minutes, maybe 120 minutes. And I just didn't think that was acceptable for a recreational product, a recreational beverage. And so our second hurdle that we had to get over was trying to find a way to make this, the THC that we initially put in and then later CBD, to make that water soluble. And so what we came across was we had some chemists that we were working with who had a nano-emulsification process. Now, this was 2.5 years ago, so it was in the early days of the nano-emulsification. It's become much more ubiquitous nowadays, especially with beverages, because the nano-emulsification basically shears down the particles and encapsulates them in a water-soluble molecule. So it stays suspended perfectly in the liquid. You can dose yourself throughout the bottle. You don't get the ring of THC at the top. And since the particles are so small, they start absorbing through your thin tissue linings, and it gets absorbed directly into the bloodstream. And what that means is you have an onset time, typically between 15 and 30 minutes, but some super sensitive people that I've talked to feel it in as little as 5 to 10 minutes. And so that really gets into the recreational time frame, where it really mimics the onset that you would expect from an alcoholic beverage. And then because of that, it also dissipates quicker also, where you're not going to maybe feel like heavily stoned as you would for 8-10 hours. It'll start dissipating maybe after 4 hours, or if you metabolize slightly slower, maybe 6 hours. But certainly you're not going to be on for as long of a ride as traditional edibles would have done it for, would have caused you to go. And so we find it to be a much more recreational product. And so we initially launched the THC infused beer under the brand High Style. We launched it on New Year's Day in 2019 here in San Diego. And then right at the very beginning of 2020 of this year, we started launching a CBD infused product under the brand Outbound Brewing. And that one was aimed for national distribution, and we were in the process of talking with several national distributors to get that out nationwide, and that was right before the COVID pandemic hit, and almost all new products and product introductions to shelves pretty much came to a screeching halt. And that's where we're sitting right now, Jesse. I think I might have answered your question in a little bit.
No, that was incredible. That was fantastic. And I want to dig a little bit into some of what you said there, especially those distribution deals and the interest around CBD infused beer and what that means, not just for your company, but the industry at large. But let's talk just a little bit more about you and sort of your relationship with both beer and cannabis, I suppose, in your life. You talked about the social element, and beer obviously is something that is just ingrained in so much of our society. There seems to be a lot of thought put into the experience that people are going to have when they drink this beer, from the taste to the onset. And I've heard you say that the idea is that by the end of one beer, you can have a sense of how it's going to affect you and decide whether or not you're going to consume more. How does beer and cannabis kind of play into your life, and how did that inform the creation process of the product?
Oh man, that's a great question, Jesse. So we'll take it all the way back about 34 years ago. I was born in Denver, Colorado, and then whenever I was about 12 years old, I moved up to the Pacific Northwest in Washington, right across the river from Portland, Oregon, and lived there for about 15 years. And then about a decade ago, I moved down to San Diego. And so I've sort of hit the three hot spots for both craft beer and cannabis in the United States.
Yeah.
you could say that I was sort of raised for this, kind of, I guess. But my relationship with cannabis didn't really begin until I was 19 or 20. I'll get into that in a minute. But my relationship with craft beer actually started way before that. I would say I was probably about 13 years old whenever my dad decided that he wanted to start doing some home brewing and craft brewing. And that was something that I could help him with. And it was sort of like doing our own little form of alchemy out in the garage. And it gave us 6 to 8 hours to set and hang out. And, it was like I wasn't building with Legos as much anymore. And so this was our new building activity that my dad and I took on together. So I would say from a young age, I had an appreciation for the craft of beer and how it was made. And then, as I got a little bit older, I started tasting craft brews and then comparing them to, your Bud Lights or your Coors Lights, which definitely have a great market, but they're not as experimental or flavorful. And I really like the experimentation that you could have with craft beer. And then whenever I got into, college, my undergraduate degree, started using some cannabis. I stayed away from it in high school because apparently the DARE programs were effective. I had a different perspective of what cannabis would do to your mind. as an athlete in high school, I just wanted to stay away from that and focus on, athletics and academics. My experiences in college basically led me to understand that almost all the dare programming around marijuana was a bunch of shit, and it really wasn't a damaging product or anything. And so I really became enamored with the education aspect, as well as helping people have better experiences with it. And I think that's really one of the major things is, with substances such as cannabis, it's not damaging, but it's absolutely mind altering. And if you're learning about its usage or learning about usage habits from other uninformed people, or perhaps from a person who's trying to sell you the product, you're not really going to have the best experience. You're not going to have a guided experience, and it might not be fun for you. Now, what I'm talking about is, whenever you first start smoking weed, everybody wants to get as high as they can, and that leads a lot of people to having paranoia or getting anxious during it. And they don't want to smoke anymore because they've had a bad experience, because nobody's taught them about responsible consumption, because it's an illegal substance. So I would say one of the big things that I was very excited about switching over into the cannabis industry, whenever I decided to make that jump about 3 years ago, was really helping to educate people on what cannabis was, what the plant did, and how it really wasn't the evil thing that we grew up, with reefer madness and everything. So the opportunity to go and speak with people, teach people responsible consumption habits, and how different cannabinoids and different terpene profiles might affect their experience on the plant. I think that's the most exciting thing about being in the industry to me right now.
So that's very interesting, because it sounds to me like, from your story, the actual creation of the recipe, the sort of process that was kicked off here, was more based off of sort of the regulations, in that you were creating a non-alcoholic beer because that was going to be the only legal way to create this sort of vehicle for THC. But when it comes to the CBD infused beers, you guys see a market for this beer, or a potential interest. There's somebody out there who wants this, and the beer distributors seem to agree. You mentioned that there were these deals. So, who exactly do you kind of envision as the person who's going to be enjoying these CBD beers?
Yeah, so that's another good one. The CBD beers are really helping to sort of take it to the next step.
No problem.
In terms of, over the past couple of years, also actually really since we started launching High Style, the THC infused one, we started seeing several other breweries come out with more craft style non-alcoholic beers. And this was really driven by a shift in consumers towards more health conscious consumption. A lot of people who like to go, lead active lifestyles, a lot of marathon runners, or people who go hiking, mountain biking, mountain climbing, anything that's sort of like an outdoor strenuous activity. A lot of those people are associated and enjoy the variety and flavors of craft beer, but don't necessarily like the dehydrating aspects of it. Now, there's a lot of sorry, I'm sort of tripping over my words here. What we've seen over the last couple of years is a lot of other breweries offering non-alcoholic alternatives in a craft beer. And the reason for this is the beer is it's got nutrients in it. It can help replenish you after a workout, but the alcohol in the beer actually reduces, your ability to uptake those nutrients. It dehydrates you. It acts as a diuretic. So these non-alcoholic beers are really rising in popularity because they're really rising in popularity for an active lifestyle. And we saw that happening as we were releasing it with THC. And then we looked at the medical benefits of CBD, and we thought that, this would be an additive that we could put in that would actually help people perhaps recover a little bit more or feel better after a strenuous workout. Now, what we ran into at the beginning of this year, that we were talking at the beginning of the of our interview about was that we were waiting for California Assembly Bill AB 228 to pass, or I'm sorry, not California, just the Assembly Bill 228 to pass, which would have allowed us to put CBD in as an additive, a food additive. Currently, with the TTB, which is the National Tobacco and Alcohol Bureau, they consider CBD to be an adulterant if it's added into a food. It can be sold as a dietary supplement, so it's like a tincture. Charlotte's Web does that. A bunch of other companies are doing CBD tinctures, so it's a dietary supplement. But as an additive in the food, and beverage is considered a food, it would be considered an adulterant. So we were waiting for that bill to pass, and we had several national distributors, especially. There's a big appetite for CBD beverages down south, Texas, Oklahoma, and then on the East Coast and like the Carolinas. They actually had a very huge appetite for this product. But the pandemic that we've all been experiencing this year really pushed the discussion of AB 228 far down Congress's list. So sort of left us setting out there with unfilled demand and unable to fill that demand due to regulations.
That's really interesting, and I got to be honest, I hadn't even necessarily thought about it from that angle. I can imagine a future where an athlete might choose to have like a CBD beer to unwind, and actually it might help them after the big game in a way that consuming a beer wouldn't. Staying on the subject of the NFL, what would it take to see CBD beers, advertised on the Super Bowl, or to see some of the big brewers and manufacturers getting involved? Is it just a matter of time now with the pandemic? Do you expect the regulation that you need to click into place just a little bit later down the line?
I do expect the regulations to click into place, but to be completely honest with you, Jesse, I'm not sure if those regulations are going to be necessary. I do believe that federal legalization is probably on the way, and with that is going to come a whole new set of federal standards and regulations for the cannabis marketplace, and I think that the TTB will probably be forced to look more into cannabis laws and regulations if they aren't just essentially given cannabis on a federal level to integrate with their with their current responsibilities. And so I think that the results of that are going to be that CBD will be allowed as a food additive as soon as the proper studies are conducted. It'll be allowed to be a food additive or a dietary supplement. And at that point, I really don't think that it's going to necessarily matter whether it's in an alcoholic or a non-alcoholic product. Based on my experience, my research, CBD has really no interactions with alcohol. I could definitely still see them not allowing us to federally put THC in an alcoholic product just because of the the crossfade effect. It's a little bit more difficult to manage and can cause unintended side effects. But I do think that by the time the pandemic clears down, there will be a large push towards federal legalization that is essentially going to render AB 228 and the other legislation that we were holding our breaths for earlier this year. I think it's going to become pretty unimportant at that time, to be honest with you.
I've been asking this question to pretty much everybody I've been talking to recently because obviously a presidential election, especially I think this presidential election, represents a moment of potentially at least two, diverging pathways and a lot of change. How do you prepare for a moment like this? It sounds like you have a pretty clear idea of what you expect, but as a business owner, do you kind of stay in the R&D phase? Do you start making moves? I know we're very, very close to finding out what at least the near term means, but no matter who wins the presidency, that's not going to give us an answer on federal legalization immediately. I'm just curious what it's like to be in charge in a moment like this.
The big decision was basically as the regulations aren't being discussed currently in Congress, and we do have to wait a little bit longer. We have shifted the focus on the additives for our non-alcoholic beer. So we have a delicious base beer. Like I told you, it's based off of a pale ale recipe, and then we've got two other flavors out. One is a grapefruit haze, and the other one being a blood orange flavored haze. They've got excellent flavor, and sorry. So what we really need to do is look at alternatives. What we know the market we're trying to hit is health conscious people who enjoy a delicious craft brewed beverage, and they want to get some sort of a physiological benefit from it. And so what we've started doing is R&Ding other additives, doing the same nano-emulsification process to them, and putting those into the beer. And we're talking about additives that aren't cannabis derived. They're currently allowed to be added as food supplements, but aren't usually added into beer. So we're looking for other ways to achieve our goal, even if it doesn't have cannabinoids in it for the time being. And in the future, we can come back, and as regulations allow us to distribute on a national scale, then we'll revisit the adding CBD. Then it could be put in addition to the other additives that we're currently experimenting with. So our goal remains unchanged, and that is to provide a delicious craft brewed beer with no alcohol, or technically a non-alcoholic beer, 0.5% ABV or less, that actually has some benefit and some ability to help you renew your body after a strenuous day of activity.
So if I'm understanding correctly, I guess there's sort of an interesting wrinkle. You guys are sort of in a specific situation because your drink is brewed. Basically, it mimics something that typically has alcohol in it. And because it has CBD in this current moment, it would be regulated. But is it true that, if in the case of like a infused water product, they wouldn't necessarily have to go through the same sets of trials, shall we say?
Yeah. That's pretty much what it boils down to. Even other beer manufacturers are not. Other beer manufacturers are actually getting into the game, but what they're doing is they're releasing seltzers or carbonated water that has hop flavoring, or they're doing other processes. They're releasing other beverages. They have they've got the name of the brewery on it, but nothing that's actually inside of the bottle is brewed, and it was never above 0.5% ABV. And that's where they're able to get through these regulations, because if the liquid is never brought above that threshold, then they aren't beholden to the TTB regulations. And so they're not a federally regulated product. Our issue is that during our brewing process, the alcohol does go up to higher than 0.5% ABV. And so that puts us under the regulation of the TTB. It was something that we wanted to do. We were very excited about creating a delicious non-alcoholic beer. We just, we didn't necessarily have the foresight at the time to think about how difficult it would be working through federal regulations. And some of these larger breweries that have entered the marketplace with infused seltzers or sparkling waters, they planned a little bit better. They had a little bit better foresight than we did. And they went away from their core competency of brewing a beer and just stuck with their brand and a product that closely approximated it.
I think that's interesting on multiple levels, because it sort of speaks to a larger trend within cannabis, kind of wherever you are, which is that, especially in this new market, there's a large upfront cost to making sure you get things right, to navigating regulations, hiring lawyers and consultants to kind of navigate your process from beginning to end. I'm curious, how does that sort of affect a company like you? Like, would you do things differently if you could go back? And how does that kind of inform how you go forward?
Well, I think it's always important to learn from your past. So everything I've done in the past is going to affect the way I go forward. But yeah, it was more difficult as a little company. In some ways, it was very nice. We were very agile. Decision making was quicker. I came into the cannabis industry from the semiconductor industry before. I worked for one of the world giants, and it was $12 billion of revenue a year at that company, and decisions never happened fast. It always had to go through multiple levels of approvals, had to be, discussed, a lot of studies. But they're a very successful company. Fast forwarding to operating a small company like High Style and Outbound, much more abbreviated decision-making process, and we were able to change our direction very quickly. I would say it was both a positive and a negative. It allowed us to get on shelves first in California, having that sort of agility, but we also didn't have the layers of legal review. Making sure that everything was actually going to be kosher moving forward. So I think it helped us get out there and make a splash early on in the game. But ultimately, it ended up hamstringing us as we tried to expand and move into other markets. So I would say,
really
if a few other things would have lined up right, it would have been great for us. COVID was something that we couldn't have predicted, and without that, I really do think that the CB side would have already been blown up on a national scale. But that's all speculation on my part. But every day has been a learning experience. Absolutely.
And by all means, stop me if you disagree, but it seems to me that this is another example of a law or a series of laws that were, intended to ultimately protect the public, good intentioned or not, fully aware of what we know today when they were created or not. But it's a law that also seems to kind of maybe do more harm than good, or restrict something that could be a positive, in that we know that people do struggle with overuse of alcohol. Alcohol can be a negative in people's lives. The product that you were making actually wasn't an alcoholic product. It's one of these not weird. It happens all the time in law where, an unintended consequence is stops something that would potentially be a benefit. And I guess I'm wondering, what do we do about that? Obviously, you as a company have a role, but for the average consumer who says, hey, I really liked drinking beer. It's not something that fits into my life anymore, but this whole infused CBD beer thing sounds pretty good to me. Do you think that the answer is just that folks need to kind of demand more knowledge and flexibility from the regulators, from the folks in charge? Like, is this a conversation that we just all have to kind of have as a society? Or where does change come from when it seems like a pretty obvious argument could be made that this law just isn't kind of doing what it's supposed to?
Yeah, that's accurate. I would say probably the best way to get around that would be, writing letters to your local regulator, asking them for, or your, especially your local representatives. I think that a lot of, well, this is all speculation on my part again, but the alcohol industry, until they can get a good hold on cannabis aspects, they're threatened by the potential that the cannabis industry has. And so I think they're going to be lobbying to keep current laws in place as long as possible. I think getting the laws changed around the non-alcoholic products, or the alcohol removed products, definitely needs to come from probably, I would say that, it has to be a ground up. I would say people who want that sort of a product need to talk to their local Congress people about it. I don't think that it's going to get changed necessarily by small companies like mine. We don't necessarily have the resources to go to the TTB and talk to them. I've been on several calls with them. We have discussed things with them, but They weren't necessarily open to changing their laws on that, especially for a federally illegal substance or something that's derived from it. It all has to go through Congress right now. So if people can write to their local Congress people in support of AB 228, in support of any other bill that allows CBD to be added to food or beverage products, that's really where we're going to get that from. We could be shipping out our non-alcoholic beer right now with nothing else in it, but it's an expensive process, and I'm not sure volumes would quite make business sense for us.
I guess perhaps my last question for you would be, do you have a favorite of the three beers you guys are currently offering?
Yeah, I actually really love the blood orange haze that we do. It was our second varietal that we launched. Like I said, we launched with the pale haze, and then for 420 last year, actually, we released our blood orange haze, which I thought just had a fantastic flavor profile. It was extremely refreshing. I loved it during the summertime. And the terpene profile, we added a proprietary terpene blend to each of the beers, and I found that one just to completely energize me. I would throw a couple of those beers into my Camelback and then head out and hike a mountain and just feel completely energized for the entire day. So I would say blood orange was absolutely my favorite.
Fantastic. I hope I'm here in Chicago, but I hope that maybe by next summer or some summer in the future, I can try out a blood orange haze in the backyard.
I would love that. Absolutely. If you ever make it down to San Diego, you got to let me know, and we'll get you one on the beach.
Fantastic. Lyden Henderson is the co-founder of Outbound Brewing. Lyden, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Jesse. It's been a pleasure.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground@TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at trichomes.com and following us on all social media. The show is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Betend, and thank you for listening.